The boardroom fell silent as Marcus Sterling's $10,000 Italian loafer crushed the janitor's paper napkin into the marble floor. "This," the billionaire CEO sneered, holding up the crumpled scrap, "is what happens when we let the help think they belong at the table." Daniel Torres felt every eye in the room turn toward him. His hands, still damp from mopping the executive floor, trembled as he clutched his cleaning cart. He'd only stepped into the boardroom because he'd forgotten his supplies during the lunch break, but now he stood frozen, wishing the polished floor would swallow him whole. "I'm sorry, Mr. Sterling," Daniel whispered, his voice barely audible. "I was just what? Trying to play executive?" Marcus cut him off, his voice dripping with contempt. The other board members shifted uncomfortably in their leather chairs, but nobody spoke up. Nobody ever did. Marcus Sterling hadn't built a billion-dollar empire by listening to criticism. "You know what your napkin doodles are worth to me, janitor? Nothing. Less than nothing." Daniel's face burned as he bent to retrieve the napkin, but Marcus's shoe pressed down harder. Behind his wire-rimmed glasses, Daniel's eyes welled up, not from the humiliation, he'd grown accustomed to that over the years, but from the thought of his 7-year-old daughter, Sophia, waiting for him at home. She believed her papa could do anything, solve any problem. If only she could see him now. "Mr. Sterling, please," Daniel managed, his accent thickening with emotion. "I need to finish my shift." Marcus finally lifted his foot, and Daniel scrambled to grab the napkin before hurrying out of the boardroom. Behind him, he could hear Marcus's cruel laughter echoing off the glass walls. "That's why some people clean floors and others own the building," the CEO announced to scattered, nervous chuckles. What Marcus Sterling didn't know was that Daniel Torres had once been more than a janitor. 6 years ago, he'd been an engineer at a mid-sized manufacturing firm in Detroit, with a promising career and a beautiful wife, Maria. Then came the diagnosis, stage 4 cancer. Daniel had spent every penny fighting for Maria's life, remortgaging their home, draining their savings, taking loans he couldn't repay. When she passed away 2 years later, Daniel was left with crushing debt, a traumatized daughter, and a resume that now had a gap no one wanted to overlook. Janitorial work was all he could find in New York City that offered night shifts, allowing him to be with Sophia during the day. Every evening, he'd kiss his daughter goodnight, promise her a better tomorrow, and head to Sterling Industries to clean the spaces where millionaires made decisions that would never benefit people like him. That night, as Daniel mopped the empty boardroom, his eyes kept drifting to his napkin, now smoothed out on his cart. He'd been sketching during his lunch break, an old habit from his engineering days. The drawing showed a modified design for the circuit board in Sterling's latest product, the Smart Home Hub 3.0. Daniel had overheard the executives panicking about overheating issues that were causing units to fail. Their solution involved an expensive recall and complete redesign that would cost the company hundreds of millions. Daniel's sketch showed a simpler solution, a slight rearrangement of components and improved heat dissipation using existing materials. It would work. He knew it would. But who would listen to a janitor? 3 weeks later, disaster struck Sterling Industries. The Smart Home Hub 3.0 wasn't just overheating, units were catching fire. Homes were damaged. Lawsuits were filed. The company's stock plummeted 40% in 2 days. Marcus Sterling called an emergency board meeting, his usual arrogance replaced by something Daniel had never seen before, fear. "We're looking at bankruptcy," Marcus admitted, his voice hollow as Daniel quietly emptied trash bins in the corner. "The recall alone will cost $400 million. The lawsuits could triple that. We have 72 hours to present a solution to our investors, or they walk." "What about the redesign Thompson proposed?" one board member asked. "It'll take 9 months and another $200 million in R&D, another replied. "We don't have 9 months. Daniel's hands shook as he lifted a trash bag. He thought about Sophia, about the notice from their landlord threatening eviction, about the jar of change on their kitchen counter that was supposed to cover groceries for the week. He thought about dignity, about every time he'd been invisible in this building, about the napkin crushed under Marcus Sterling's shoe. He thought about Maria, who'd always told him, do the right thing, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. "Excuse me," Daniel heard himself say. His voice sounded strange, too loud in the desperate silence. Marcus looked up, irritation flashing across his face. "We're in a crisis, janitor. Whatever you need can wait." "No, sir," Daniel said, surprising himself with his firmness. He reached into his uniform pocket and pulled out the napkin, now worn and carefully preserved. "I think I can help." The boardroom erupted in laughter. Marcus's face turned crimson. "Security. Get this. Wait." The voice came from Helen Winters, the company's chief technology officer, the only board member who'd sometimes nodded hello to Daniel. "Let him speak." Daniel approached the table on trembling legs and spread the napkin on the polished surface. "I used to be an electrical engineer," he began, his voice growing steadier. "I've been listening to your meetings while I clean. Your overheating problem, it's not the circuit design itself. It's the component placement and insufficient heat dissipation. If you rearrange these elements here, and modify the housing ventilation pattern like this, you solve the problem without a complete redesign." Helen leaned forward, her eyes widening. She pulled out her phone, rapidly calculating. This could actually work. It's brilliant. Simple but brilliant. Marcus snatched the napkin, studying it with dawning realization. "You're saying you solve this? You've been cleaning our floors while knowing how to fix a $400 million problem?" Daniel met his eyes steadily. "I'm saying I'm a father who needs to keep his job and feed his daughter. I'm saying people aren't worthless just because they clean up after you. And I'm saying that sometimes the solutions you need are right under your feet, you just have to stop stepping on them." The silence in the room felt different now. Heavier. More honest. Helen stood up. "We need to run simulations immediately, but if this works, Daniel just saved this company." It did work. Within 48 hours, Helen's team confirmed Daniel's solution would solve the overheating issue for under $5 million. The stock recovered. The investors stayed. Sterling Industries survived. 2 weeks later, Daniel was called to Marcus Sterling's office. He expected a check, maybe a thank you. Instead, Marcus extended his hand, the same hand that had crushed his napkin. "I was wrong," Marcus said simply. "About you. About a lot of things. I'd like to offer you a position as a consulting engineer. Full salary, benefits, day shift hours. And I'd like to apologize." Daniel looked at the hand, thinking about how easy it would be to reject it, to savor this moment of vindication. But then he thought about Sophia, about Maria's words, about the kind of man he wanted to be. He shook Marcus's hand. "I accept. But I have one condition." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Name it." "Create a scholarship program for employees who want to return to school or transition careers. And treat every person in this building, from the mailroom to the boardroom, with the respect they deserve." Marcus nodded slowly. "Done." That night, Daniel came home before dark for the first time in years. Sophia ran into his arms, and he lifted her high, laughing. "Papa. You're home for dinner." "I'm home for all the dinners now, mi amor," he whispered, holding her tight. On his kitchen counter, next to the jar of change, sat a framed napkin, a reminder that worth isn't measured by titles or bank accounts, but by the courage to use your gifts, the strength to maintain dignity, and the humanity to believe everyone has something valuable to offer. Sometimes the smallest voice carries the most important message. Sometimes a crumpled napkin can redraw the blueprint of an entire life.